Hello, my name is Brian Anderson. I work at Eagle Technologies. I appreciate everybody hopping on today. We had a tremendous amount of people sign up, and we really appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to attend this third Protips webinar. As you can see with the video and the names down at the right, I've got a little help from some of my friends today. With Eagle, we have Anthony Schweitzer. He's going to be helping me herd cats and taking care of a lot of the back end stuff. You might speak up too. He's always smiling. There it is. Come on. Okay. And then from HPE, we've got Mike Whitaker and Sean Godinez. Hey, guys.
Hey.
So as I mentioned earlier, this is our third Protips webinar. Just a quick recap. We did our first Protips webinar on snapshots. That's something kind of near and dear to my heart. The cliff notes of that presentation was that with an array like Nimble, you have the ability to take literally over 100,000 snapshots in a non-performance impacting way. They're very space efficient. And so we went over the whole host of ways that you could leverage snapshots to, I think the theme was save your bacon. We talked about restoring files, VMs, entire groups of VMs. And of course, that's extremely relevant right now with the threat of ransomware and mass encryption. So like all of these webinars, these are recorded and online. And in my humble opinion, if you missed one and should go back and see it, I would pick that one. The second webinar, we did a presentation on InfoSight. We talked about the evolution of InfoSight, all of the deep information and analytics. Anyone that's been a Nimble customer for any amount of time has spent some time in there. But we specifically focused on cross-stack analytics and how you solve problems with all of that information. And we even spent a little bit of time talking about what's next. That webinar was well received as well. Probably would worth some time over lunch if you haven't seen it. And today we're going to talk about Nimble dHCI. We're going to do an overview and some of the benefits. So as I mentioned earlier, this is our third Protips webinar. Just a quick recap. We did our first Protips webinar on snapshots. That's something kind of near and dear to my heart. The cliff notes of that presentation was that with an array like Nimble, you have the ability to take literally over 100,000 snapshots in a non-performance impacting way. They're very space efficient. And so we went over the whole host of ways that you could leverage snapshots to, I think the theme was save your bacon. We talked about restoring files, VMs, entire groups of VMs. And of course, that's extremely relevant right now with the threat of ransomware and mass encryption. So like all of these webinars, these are recorded and online. And in my humble opinion, if you missed one and should go back and see it, I would pick that one. The second webinar, we did a presentation on InfoSight. We talked about the evolution of InfoSight, all of the deep information and analytics. Anyone that's been a Nimble customer for any amount of time has spent some time in there. But we specifically focused on cross-stack analytics and how you solve problems with all of that information. And we even spent a little bit of time talking about what's next. That webinar was well received as well. Probably would worth some time over lunch if you haven't seen it. And today we're going to talk about Nimble dHCI. We're going to do an overview and some of the benefits. You know, as I mentioned on that last slide, we're moving on 40 years in business. Pretty awesome to work at a place like Eagle where I get to stand on all those folks' shoulders that came before me. I've been at Eagle for 10 years. They've built a lot of credibility. And we like to think that we're a little bit of a different duck. We go out and we do a ton of research and due diligence. We test and demo and ultimately deploy inside our own internal processes and managed services all of the products that we position with our customers. We staff our own support agency. We take that cradle to grave mentality and we take our job pretty seriously and we like to focus on outcomes. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes, so to speak. I'm going to do a quick flyover of how we got to here. So we're going to start with talking about converged infrastructure. So here's the textbook definition, but in a nutshell, converged infrastructure took traditional three-tier architecture, which typically means networking, servers, and storage, and they attempted to reduce the complexity of that environment. So ideally, and the definition shifts sometimes, one group was going to handle the engineering, manufacturing, management, support, and sustaining. And of course, the big benefit that I saw here with converged infrastructure is the fact that all of the software and firmware was intended to be QA'd, validated, all the pieces and parts work together, and then everything was patched in bundles. Anybody that's worked in IT for more than a minute has had the painful issue of vendors pointing fingers and trying to figure out why something's not working well together. Now, as far as I know, the folks that created the notion of convergence was VCE with vBlock. That was originally a partnership with Cisco, VMware, and EMC. And a lot of other players followed suit. You can see, I actually just typed this list out of my head, and then I noticed that Cisco will take anybody to the prom dance, right? But you know, working with customers that had converged infrastructure, I kept getting some recurring themes. One of them was there was no real extra pieces of orchestration that came together to unify the architecture. They were essentially still just three-tier architectures. Updates still had the potential to be painful. They were often batch files. And in a nutshell, the consensus I got was that most customers weren't seeing really the value that they were seeking. And I hate to pick on vBlock, but just as an example, I've never met a customer that bought their second vBlock. They were expensive, and once again, I don't think customers were getting out of it what they were looking to get out of it. So during this time, we started to see kind of the second generation of converged architecture pop up, HCI. And the takeaways here from the textbook definition is that it's a software-centric architecture that integrated all of those three-tier components and had a single vendor, in theory, that was supporting the whole stack. Now, you'll notice that some of the benefits borrow from converged infrastructure, but once again, that single throat to choke. The things that I liked out of the HCI was full stack visibility. If you own the whole stack, it should be easier to provide that level of visibility. Once again, it had the QA and the intercompatibility of firmware. And then the really exciting part was this was the first time I saw real GUI-based automation and orchestration. So HCI has and continues to generate a lot of interest in the modern data center. But just like three-tier architecture, as we get feedback from customers, we've learned that it's really not the magic bullet. So here's something I present on quite a bit. I did this back at trade shows back before COVID. I can speak for an hour on this slide. I'm going to give it the 30-second flyover. But just some of the challenges that we see with HCI is with the extreme level of integration. It makes it harder to grow the individual pieces and parts. You know, you run into limitations on how disk groups can be. I have a lot of customers that want to add storage and they're forced to add another compute node. That means more socket licensing, more compute they don't need. Customers with large secondary workloads may end up having to buy a separate NAS. They may have a new VDI workload or some BI or SQL initiative and they have to build out a separate cluster. I've seen some brutally long update windows at scale. And really the thing that's bugged me the most about HCI is that the data services are still fairly immature. What I mean by that is take deduplication, for instance. It's typically per disk group, per host. If a vendor does claim it's global, they'll put little catchwords at the beginning like adaptive because it's truly not global. It's not in line. Snapshots have always been another gripe of mine. A lot of prominent HCI products don't even recommend using their snapshot engines. They want you to layer on some sort of snapshot and replication engine. Others brag they can take snapshots every hour. And as we talked about in that first webinar, ransom mitigation can be very painful. And having an infrastructure that can take frequent non-performance impacting snapshots and track them for a significant amount of time is very powerful, right? So another problem that we've seen, and really all vendors do this now, is I think vBlock was the first, but vendors realize that it's much easier not to talk about the architecture. So we see what's called outcomes-based marketing. That means they recognize the problems you have in the data center and they tell you they can fix them, right? So the problem here is it makes due diligence hard because every vendor basically presents this in the same way. They all tell you they solve problems and it creates difficulty when it comes to due diligence. And so a lot of Anthony and the other pre-sales at Eagle in our meetings, they have kind of devolved into this when we meet customers that are refreshing infrastructure. Should I look at HCI or should I look at three-tier architecture? Which one do I pick? And so we often talk through the benefits, the pros and cons. You know, some of the heavy hitters are here. HCI is meant to be simple, to have really good orchestration. You've got that true single vendor, right? And you've got really good lifecycle assurance and QA. With three-tier architectures, it's something you're comfortable with. It's very mature. It has those better data services we talked about. In all of my due diligence, it's more affordable. And once again, one of the biggies is you only grow what you need, right? you need more storage performance, you upgrade your controllers. You need more capacity, you upgrade your storage. You need a new SQL server because you're getting pinched on licensing. Well, we can add a single server and leverage your N+1 from your other cluster. So ultimately, one of the questions I get from my customers is, why can't I have something with all of the bennies? Is we really haven't gotten into the textbook definition of what dHCI is. And as you can see, dHCI is a model that stays true to the benefits of the original HCI model, right? That orchestration, that QA, but allows independent scaling of the individual components. And so I don't want to steal any more of Mike's thunder. So with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Whitaker.
Thanks, Brian. No, we really appreciate it. And with dHCI, now of course HPE has got another HCI product in SimpliVity, right? So this wasn't a matter of we were just trying to fill a hole or a gap in our portfolio, but really listening to our customers and trying to understand what it was that they were asking us for, from our smallest environments, you know, all the way up to some of the very large ones. And here on the screen, you're going to see a number of things that when we were doing our surveying that they really were asking us for, right? They wanted something that could provide that simplicity and that ease of management so that their IT staffs could not have to be, you know, siloed specialists. I know when I first started in IT back years and years and years ago, I was a storage and I was a backup specialist. I'd never really dealt with anything on the server side, and I'm old enough to say that this was pre-virtualization. So we had a lot of different silos. You include the network people. You had a lot of different people that were all looking to do the best that they could do, but there wasn't a lot of easy calibration inside of the platform. So we needed to have that full stack intelligence so that we could efficiently and easily run that entire stack. Now, you can't give up some very, very important pieces here, right? You have to have uncompromising efficiency and security built into it as well. And as we continue to move forward in our journey, you've got to be able to integrate now some of these public cloud pieces and be flexible to support these new application directions, so that as these applications are modernized, that the platform's got to support those as well as our old legacy stuff. So really our goal here is to have it all. And we believe like we've hit that mark. Now, Brian, if you would move on to the next slide for me.
Yes, sir.
And dHCI is what we consider to be the second level or the second version of hyperconverged infrastructure. We continue to call it hyperconverged because it does provide that simple interface so that you can have a generalist run the entire environment without needing to have a PhD in any particular discipline. Now, it also, for us, it's got to be something that falls into the Nimble mantra of customer experience. And I think as we walk through this, you're going to see that this is really more an evolution of the Nimble platform than it really is of the HPE platform. If you go to the next slide for me. When we start to build this up, it's like Legos, right? Just like HCI, as you're going to add pieces as necessary. With dHCI, you're adding the right pieces when necessary. So it starts with a base platform of Nimble storage. Now this can be this can be a all-flash array, this can be a hybrid array. It just has to be a Gen 5 Nimble storage box with the right software on it. Next, we get into the compute side. Now, we are HPE, right? So we are going to be biased when we're talking about what servers can be added into it. It's going to be an Intel or an AMD-based ProLiant DL series. Now, you'll also notice that we're put both Gen 9 and Gen 10 in here. So if you have existing Gen 9 servers, you have a path to get here already. So we're not trying to lock anybody out. And we're also wanted to make it something that you could build as you continue to move forward. VMware vSphere as the hypervisor, 6.5, 6.7, or 7.0. If you're into something a little bit more fringe, like a Google Anthos, or you're building something of that nature, we have solutions for that as well, but we're going to really concentrate here on our most common use case. Now, the big piece here between what is just a stack of servers and storage, and what is truly a dHCI setup is the management software layer. It's built into vCenter. Everything that you need to do, you should be able to do from inside of the vCenter plugin. And we've got a couple of different components of that, from our deployment to our day-to-day management, and then even now, our ability to do upgrades inside of the entire stack managed from inside of vCenter. And all of these components have to be connected together, obviously. Now we always, we're a very broad portfolio company, and we have a lot of different components inside of our portfolio, including the Aruba switching line and our Store Fabric switching line. If you are building a brand new stack and you want to go completely greenfield, we're more than happy to provide the switching for that, but it's not a requirement. If you're a Cisco shop and you want to stay on Cisco switches, that's fantastic. We're fully going to support that. If you could go to the next slide for me, Brian. Now, these are as much the Nimble architectural principles as they are the dHCI architectural principles. Nimble was always built to be something that could be user installable, manageable, and upgradable. And we believe that the dHCI stack now is inherited that DNA from Nimble storage. Also now, the ability to be simple to scale. We've had a scale out feature built into Nimble storage for years and years and years, where you can easily group an existing Nimble with a brand new one, and you can share resources and you have easy migration pass between the two. We're doing that again now, which we're going to show here in a few slides with the compute side. Simple to manage, simple to support. Support, obviously, from your day-to-day operations, but also when it comes to when you do need help, having a world-class support organization behind you that is going to help you figure out what's going on, regardless of where that bottleneck might be in the stack. And when we get to the multi-cloud piece, it could mean, it's such a broad term, right? It's very, very much overused today, I think, in our industry when we talk about multi-cloud. So without getting too specific, it's got to concentrate on the flexibility and not have a lot of lock-in to prevent you from using your vendor of choice. And simple to upgrade. This is one of our latest features that we're adding into this stack to be able to do not only firmware upgrades for the array, but also firmware upgrades for the servers, software upgrades for the servers, all in an automated, proven to be safe fashion. So if you could move to the next slide for me, Brian. Simple to deploy, simple to scale. What this screen is really representing to me here on the left-hand side is all of the administrative time that's necessary when we're going through and we're doing a deployment or we're adding to our existing environment. What we wanted to do is we wanted to take all of that stuff out and automate it, and then inside of that automation, build in the best practices. And not just best practices as they may be today, but have those best practices be organic and tailored to your environment, to have a much more prescriptive approach to these types of best practice implementations, and not just a subscriptive of, I went and I read the VMware best practices guide and it's supposed to apply to everything, so that's how I deployed it. We wanted it to be a lot more of a personalized experience. But in order to do that and make sure that it got right, we had to automate that piece of it so that every time one of these is deployed, or every time that a new compute node even is added to one of our environments, the users are going to be able to do that very easily, and they're going to be able to do it knowing that as soon as it's up and ready, it is exactly that. It's up and ready. We don't have to pour through all the documentation that we did 2 or 3 years ago to figure out how and where we set these particular things out. We wanted it to just be done right the first time. If you could move on to the next slide for me. So day-to-day management happens inside of the Stack Manager, inside of the vCenter. From there, you're able to not only see and understand and be able to be reactionary to health alerts from the storage hardware, but also with the compute hardware and have a good understanding of where my utilization is across the stack. When it comes to being able to deploy a new resource, so I need to deploy a virtual machine, we wanted everything to be very programmatic and policy based so that it really represented that HCI feel whenever you're using the system. So that means supporting new technologies like virtual volumes, or if you still want to use the legacy VMFS approach to your data stores, that's fine too. And if you wanted to use them both at the same time, absolutely, we support that as well as you modernize your environment. But to make sure that we were able to be flexible and match what our customers were demanding from us. If you can move on to the next slide for me. When it comes time to add nodes, one of the biggest knocks on your traditional hyperconverged infrastructure is that if I only need more of one resource, then I have to add resources that I may not necessarily need or incur costs that I may not necessarily need in order to get there. Now, a lot of the HCI platforms have got methods now to add a single compute node, but it's still a complex or operation where you've got limits on what you can do with this or with that. And whenever you add a compute node, again, we don't want to have to go back and reinvent the wheel when it comes to what did I do, 2 or 3 years ago when I did this last time to make sure that everything works. We wanted to have that completely automated. So when you have a dHCI set, if you have DHCP set up in your management network, you can plug it in, go back to vCenter, it will auto-detect it, it will set all of your static IPs properly, it will install the connection manager, it will connect the host to all the right volumes, and it will just walk all the way through that here in a few minutes, and then you're back to doing what your regular, 8 to 5 job is without having to spend any additional administrative overhead and get that done. And it's fully integrated into it. If you can move on to the next slide for me, Brian.
Yes, sir.
This is probably my very, very, very favorite piece of the dHCI Stack Manager. It's this configuration checker. One of the reasons that Nimble storage has been so successful over the years is that we've been able to provide all flash performance out of an array that may not have all of the bells and whistles when it comes to the hardware in it, right? Nimble's always been a very software-defined platform that continues to improve and add features through software over time. Well, the reason that we're able to do that and how we're able to provide such amazing uptime on these, quite simple arrays, honestly, is that we have this amazing AI in the background and info side that's not only allowing us to provide our support organization with the best tools in the industry and automate a lot of those just menial tasks when it comes to maintaining the health of something, but also learn and understand how our hardware is being used in people's environments, and to be able to help our customers be proactive and preventative when it comes to maintenance and support. Well, all of the intelligence, all of those sorts of things, right, it's something that's very organic and it's always growing and learning over time. We didn't want to just stop there with the storage. It's the entire stack that's important, because you've got a lot of components inside of there that are always changing, from software levels to patch levels to workloads in your environment are going to change over time. The configuration checker is built in here to help us understand where an environment sits as what we believe would be the best practice, but it's live and it's organic and it grows over time. If you were to go and install something absolutely perfectly today, you did all your research, you did all of your documentation, everything's absolutely right, just set it up, you put your workloads on it, you made it production, and you walked away from it. And it ran great, right? You did everything right, it's rock solid, it never goes down. Well, over time, 2 years, 3 years, those best practices are going to change, and your workload might change. You may acquire another company. You may have a global pandemic, and all of a sudden you've got 150 VDI users that you didn't expect to have. And those sorts of changes to your environment are going to make, they're going to require changes when it comes to those best practices. And having a piece built into the stack manager that's watching those best practices for you and making good recommendations based on your environment and not just the generic vanilla environment that everybody should get. Also, when it comes to the real meat and the stress of what our jobs are, troubleshooting issues, trying to understand what broke and how to fix it, that additional intelligence and that additional documentation that's the system's logging on its own is just going to help us get to those root causes faster, get rid of that stress faster, and sleep easier every weekend. If you could move on to the next slide for me, Brian. And then again, as this is more of a maturation of the Nimble platform, bringing a one-call support infrastructure for your servers, for your storage, for VMware, for the switches, if it is one of our switches, and having that come into, quite frankly, the absolute best support organization in the industry. It's been something that my customers so far have given me a lot of really good feedback on it.
And Mike, you guys have built a dedicated support wing for the dHCI customers, correct?
We have. So our traditional level 3 engineers that would normally answer Nimble support calls have been trained up on dHCI, but we've always had a number of Tiger teams that are built into the Nimble support infrastructure. So if you got something that was tough or specific, we would make sure that we would get you into the right expert at the right time. Yes, we do also now have dedicated tier 4, I guess you may call them, folks that are just about dHCI. These guys, they live and they breathe this day in and day out. Again, just because we want to be support that you actually like. You know, we use that tagline in a lot of our different marketing, and I think that Sean here would agree with me. The box is cool, the technology is awesome, but it was really our support infrastructure that drew me in to Nimble, and the reason likely why I work here today. If you could move to the next slide for me.
For the record, I totally agree.
So this is the latest feature that we've built into dHCI, is this ability to do those full stack upgrades from inside of vCenter and automate that all the way through. You know, issues can happen in deployment that come back and bite you later. That's why we automated the deployment. Issues can come back with expansion and scaling that can come back and get you later. And that's why we automated that piece. Well, upgrades obviously is one of those big stress points for a lot of administrators out there, and understanding how do I work through this stack, because we all now have this expectation of 24/7 uptime, right? We don't really have maintenance windows anymore unless you're in a very large or very legacy environment. So this is something that we've worked extremely hard on, right? This is something that we want to make sure is absolutely baked and right as we can start to roll this out, but something that we find extremely exciting. So inside of the vCenter plugin, inside of the Stack Manager, there is an upgrader now that allows you to upgrade the firmware and the software of the storage, of the hosts, and the ESXi software. But it's not just I get a package, I download it, I blow it, I go right into it, right? We've built actually an update catalog so that you can pick the right version that's right for you, and so that you're not forced into an upgrade path that may not make sense for your organization. You know, this is back to our dedication to being flexible and prescriptive instead of just subscriptive when it comes to how we support this this environment.
Yeah, and Mike, that the catalog process is something that I find really interesting. And, you know, we only have so much time in an hour, and we didn't want to get too deep on the details, but it's something at the end of the presentation we're going to offer up. If anyone wants to see a deep dive of some of this functionality, that would be something exciting to show.
Correct. And it's, you know, we had a lot of conversations actually internally about how we were going to do this presentation, and we're all technologists and we're all very nerdy, right? And we all get a lot of excitement and like to actually show off a demo of this kind of stuff. But truth be told, there's inside of a full stack, there's so many things that you could look at, and we only had so much time. So as Brian said, if you'd like to deep dive into any of these components, see how they work, we've got a lot of YouTube videos out there that walk you through what the deployment looks like, what the stack manager looks like. Even I think now we've got one out there for the upgrade manager. But we also have environments that if you'd like to get a much more personalized experience or walk through, if you've got specific questions, we're more than happy to do that for you. And you know, we're really proud of this, and we want to brag on ourselves here a little bit, especially because it came from VMware, who may have a little bit of a Dell slant in a lot of these awards that they gave away. But dHCI did win Best of VMworld 2020 this year for virtualization and cloud. And it's not just because of, you know, our ability to do this kind of simple deployment, but what they really liked was that we were able to take our customers that have Gen 9 and Gen 10 servers already and provide them this experience without having to do a full forklift refresh in their environment. So this is something, again, that we are super, super proud of. And, you know, unfortunately, VMworld was virtual this year and we couldn't really celebrate it in person, but I promise you we're going to be doing that next year.
Yeah, and I mean, this is no simple task, right, Mike? I mean, we've known this is coming for a while, but it's really been neat to see it come out and for them to keep that spirit of Nimble, where everything is appropriately abstracted and very simple to maintain. So it's going to be awesome to see how it evolves as well into the future. So the $1 million question, Mike.
So yeah, we've talked a lot about, you know, hardware components, software components. How do we get folks that have existing servers to a dHCI platform, and how do we differentiate between folks that just bought a Nimble and some servers and what true dHCI is? And the difference in there is going to be the experience, of course, but what the difference is not going to be is the cost. We decided a long time ago that we're simply not going to charge for these additional management components. We want our customers to use this for a couple of selfish reasons, of course, because it provides better uptime, provides a better experience. It makes our support organization less expensive to run and makes it easier for us to maintain the top-end engineers inside of our support organization. But also because we think our customers deserve it. Our Nimble customers keep coming back to Nimble for this very specific reason. I know back in the day when I was with a partner, I sold a lot of the ProStack with Cisco and Nimble for this very reason as well. They were looking for simplicity. They wanted something that was integrated. They wanted a reference architecture that was rock solid. We have well blown by that now with execution, with dHCI, and we've got some really interesting things coming later this year that I can't yet speak about. They're going to make this even better here in the future. So this is HCI 2.0 is HPE's direction. This is what our customers are asking us for, both in the regular market where you're consuming things through capital costs, as well as through this emerging market where you've got a very easy to understand subscription process for utilizing this type of environment. So when it comes to the cost for the dHCI software itself, this is just a courtesy we provide to our customers, and it will be that way going forward.
And Mike, I will second that one notion. It's been kind of standard operating procedure because of how fast technology moves, that a lot of customers switch products every 3 to 5 years, right? They go a completely different direction. And it's been really gratifying over the last 5 to 6 years to have my customers reach out and say, you know, unless you want to try to talk me out of it, I would like to refresh my infrastructure and stay with Nimble because I'm really happy with it, right? So seeing you guys extend all these capabilities out and acknowledge the need for more orchestration, right, in a simpler environment, less time spent keeping the lights on. It's been really neat to see the evolution.